Welcome to the MoMENtum Lifestyle Project podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Ruse, and here at MoMENtum, we aim to challenge and champion committed men who are ready to take charge of their lives by mastering their mind, optimizing physical potential, and unlocking their power to find their mission. Whilst our work is predominantly with men, we hope that this podcast will provide value to all who choose to listen. So without further ado, let's jump in. Boys, Blake Wall Thompson, Janoah Van Keckham, Dylan Ruse, the three amigos that make up MoMENtum Lifestyle Project. How are we going, boys?
Dylan Ruse.
Three
It's very good
Stooges,
to be
mate.
here.
The three Stooges.
Thanks for having us, Dill. Thanks for having us, mate.
Mate, no worries. I've just really wanted to get you guys on this podcast for a long time. And, we've been going back and forth with times. And it's great we can all finally sit down and have a chat.
Line up our busy schedules. Yeah, it's good.
Line up our schedules, exactly right. Well, boys, to start it off, why MoMENtum? Why men? Why a men's community? Why is this work necessary, or why is this needed? Blakey?
Well, mate, God, there's a number of different paths you can go down as to why the work's needed. But on a very surface level, I think most of us know, 8 suicides a day, 6 of them are men. So that's a broad statistic that many of us know. But why us and why now? I guess, personally for me, and we all have our individual stories as to why we've come together as a collective. I just don't want men to, there's so many bits that we'll unpack today, I'm sure, but I don't want men to have to take the long road to finding the answers that I essentially had to, and I don't want them to have to do it alone. So I've been kind of into personal development since very early. Janoah's known me for 10 years, and I was probably into it for 8 to 10 years before we met. And fuck, mate, it's been an exhausting road doing it alone, and I wouldn't want any bloke to have to go through that because they just wouldn't do it. And if you look at the landscape of the men's space at the moment, well, I think there's a really nice transition coming, and I think in 3 to 5 years' time we will have really normalised the space. There aren't that many options that are appealing to the type of blokes that we'd hang out with. And when I thought about you guys, I reached out to Janoah. I think he was having a pina colada in Sri Lanka, and you were in Melbourne. For me, you guys were always a really good fit, and you kind of blokes, but you also do the work and you get it, and you connect well with all humans. So that's a snapshot of my initial thoughts as to why MoMENtum.
Yeah. And what drove you personally to work with men? I know in your coaching business, you predominantly work with women. So was it a case of, well, I'm already working with women, let's create a platform or an environment just for men? What drove you to want to work with just men in MoMENtum?
Yeah, mate, there was heaps of resistance initially. I think in my former life, running 6-week programs, 6 weeks to Sexy and 6 weeks to Shredded in Sydney and Adelaide, is a number of those good girlfriends who are former, clients in terms of really close friends of mine. Like, you've got to start working with blokes. Like, yep, we love the work that you do with us and whatever else, but no one is really relatable and working with blokes in that space. And for me, there was a lot of resistance for probably 12 to 18 months time, or 12 to 18 months, sorry. And I guess it kind of landed, you guys know how I feel about plant medicine, and everyone's about to know. I guess it kind of landed after an ayahuasca ceremony that it's just like, it was time to do it, because no one, in my eyes at least, was stepping into the space and really taking charge. There's a couple of people that we really admire the work of, that they do overseas. But for me in Australia, and blokes like us, there was just no one doing it. And we can't, as a collective, afford for it to keep getting worse. And, in my eyes, there was a really good movement towards mental health and awareness. And that's brilliant. It's been a really nice transition over the last 3 to 5 years where, somewhat of the stigma that came with mental health has fallen away. But there wasn't, there's still a lot of people falling through the gaps and the cracks. And there wasn't a system or a platform or a community where people could go and do the work in a community that supports each other as well. So that's kind of my thoughts behind the men's space. And our big thing is to make it accessible and appealing. I don't think the men's space is the most attractive space at the moment.
Yeah.
And for that reason, if a bloke's going to do the work, he may either be turned off by it, or if he's going to do it, he'll do it very quietly because there's a stigma that comes with it. And also the other thing, if you're going to go do the work, are you going to go and do corroboree dances and eye gazers? If you're kind of dipping your toe in for the first time, well, probably not. So we really want to have an entry level that blokes can kind of step into who are, exploring the space for the first time.
Yeah. And I love that you tapped into the transitionary phase that the men's space is kind of in right now, where there are a few more options now that are more appealing to that dipping your toe in the water and, okay, who's actually running it? Is that someone that I would like to actually be in 5 years or 10 years time? And I found that 10 years ago or 8 years ago, my opinions on the personal development space, I'd always remember walking past the bookstore in the airport. I'd go and try to find a book, and there'd be that personal development section. And I'd be like looking at everyone in there, and I'd be going, geez, what a bunch of kooks. Like, what's wrong with them? Like, what personal development? What is that? I think self-help was the actual word back then, and we don't really hear self-help anymore. It is now personal development, which I think from a branding point of view is such a better term for it. And I remember looking at the self-help section going, geez, look at those crazy people over there. Jay, similar question, mate. Why for you is it important for you to be working and connecting with men? You have a pretty cool story from transitioning from the alcohol industry into a meditation teacher and men's facilitator. So run me through that kind of awakening or that process for you that got you to picking up the phone from Blake and going, yeah, let's rock it. Let's do some work in the men's space.
Mate, well, I stumbled in the beginning. I actually stumbled across starting to do the work of myself. So, prior to me, meditating or doing anything, I was really, really skeptical of anything, anti anything. Tell me to meditate, I tell you to go fuck yourself. Like, I was really like anti that kind of world, because I thought in my narrow-minded view that I kind of did have my shit sorted, but still I didn't feel great, and I didn't know what the hell that meant. And when I started, it was just because I happened to meet some people that I deemed as normal that meditated, and I looked into high performers around the world, and there was a common correlation that was meditation or mindfulness. These started to trigger in my mind. I was like, oh. And when I started to, do some more work on myself, I started realizing, where I'd fallen short in so many ways. And I realized how hard the path had been for me to figure my stuff out. Like, whether it was in relationships, whether it was socially with friends, whether it was at work. And it's really, really hard as a man in this world to figure out like what you're supposed to be or do, or how you're meant to show up. And again, I was never really like searching for personal development. It naturally started evolving over time. And it wasn't probably until I was at least about, 30, to be honest, I really started to look into the work, and all the stuff that I started learning. I was like, fuck, imagine if I'd known this stuff younger, if I'd, had some of these tools and even just the basic knowledge and some of the skills that, we're talking about now and learning, earlier on. And I'd, had more respect and openness to the industry, it would have been a totally different experience, So, prior to my current role as, facilitating with men and teaching meditation, as you mentioned, I was in the booze game. And prior to that, I was a pretty, aggressive, alcohol fueled, bloke who had in a lot of ways quite, hey?
Little rat, you little alcohol fueled rat.
Yeah, I was fucking arrogant as well. Like, I don't know, like it was just this facade that I thought I had to put on. And now looking back at that, I was like, okay, it was a process I'd gone through, but it was like, it was me showing up how I thought I had to show up with the tools and skills that I had at that time. And similar to Blake, we started chatting about the men's space, and it came from the fact that, we looked around at most of our mates, and none of us really were at the top of our game. We would put a front like we were, but we really weren't. We all either had a little bit of anxiety here, or use booze to numb stress, or whatever it was. But then you look in the space. So what do you do about it? Like, where do you go to help you perform better, to help you be more engaged in your relationship, to help you be sharper at work? And there was no real clear place to go that, as Blake mentioned, was attractive.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of naturally evolved. I remember Blakey and I had a chat about it earlier on, and I was like, oh yeah, the men's space, sure. But again, I never really pushed it, because similar to Blake, my market was naturally women more so. And then I remember he called me, he's like, bro, I've got deals. He's keen. I was like, all right, let's do it. So it's kind of fun how that played out so naturally. And then what was it like? 4 weeks, and we turned around the first event. And again, it was us feeling dipping the toe in the waters, and is this even a thing for us? And it was.
Yeah. Well, I remember when we first sat down, it was like post that event, we had 4 days in Sydney. And I remember when we were all sitting down, we're like, well, we're not a men's group. Like, no, we're not that. Like, we're not this community. Oh, that's not the right word. And, we've really spent the whole year, every couple of months, we tend to refine what we want to be called, and we refine, we've just redone our value proposition statement again for like the 3rd or 4th time. But there was so much resistance even from us who do the work and actively read books and podcasts and all that sort of stuff. And we tend to look at ourselves as, trying our best to be conscious men. But there is that still like, men's group? Nah, maybe not a men's group. Or what are we? Okay, like a collective of men. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Network. Oh, that's too businessy. We're not really business. So we really struggled to figure out where we fit into the men's space, because even for us, like the stigma around the men's space wasn't great. And I think as now that I'm over here in America, the problems are pretty universal. I think I'm starting to deconstruct my own notions around the Australian male being more like, oh, I'm an Aussie male, right? Like, I'm actually noticing the American men over here are very much similar. They're very much going through the same problems, societal expectations that Australian men do. And maybe it isn't just Aussie men that are struggling because of that Australian banter, the Australian mindset, etc. So it's an interesting one being over here and seeing the universal issues that men are facing. So, Blakey, back to you. I don't necessarily like this term, but what are men lacking right now? What is the 1 to 2 things which, either we're at MoMENtum, we're trying to, with our 4 pillars, trying to address all the issues. But what would be, for anyone listening, that first step that they need to take, or that first step that they need to look on, because that's the biggest issue that men face. That's the biggest obstacle or challenge that we as men face.
Mate, I think, to be honest, it's probably universal, but slightly stronger in the men's space, in that loneliness, loneliness is the next epidemic, and it's still not really getting spoken of. Although I think throughout the course of 2020, people started to, join the dots a little bit. Loneliness is the number one predictor of early mortality, and that doesn't get much talk, that doesn't get much traction, but I think that's the big thing. So, all well and good going and liking, your mate's photo and putting a bit of banter underneath it. But if you're not feeling like you're properly connected to them, or you're not feeling like you've got people that you can really confide in when you're struggling, then you're fucked. Like, it's hard enough, to go through the struggles that world's going to throw at you at different stages. And obviously for a lot of people, they experience that in 2020, but it is so much worse to go through it alone. I know in that kind of 15-month period that I had, that was an absolute doozy, how much worse it was. And not necessarily anyone to blame or pointing fingers, in that I wasn't, proactive in reaching out. You and I had just become friends. Jay and I were good friends, but we probably didn't click, or I didn't feel comfortable for whatever reason going to him. And I just remember, I had a split second moment where I was like, fuck, this is made so much worse by the fact that I can't, quote unquote, lean on other people. But I probably, one, hadn't established that kind of connection with so many people. And two, probably had a limiting belief that I couldn't when fact is that I probably could. So loneliness for me is the number one thing, and a community of like-minded men. One of the worst things I think you can do, and I've been there, and I think all three of us have been there, and again, no judgment, each to their own, but like to go to the pub and have a conversation where, how's work? Good. How's your girlfriend? Good. How are you? Good. Like that, like, fuck, mate, give me something. Yeah. And even, in those early stages of creating deeper connection, it's like, oh, mate, you mentioned, your missus had health problems a couple of months ago. How's she going with that? Like, just that extra question can create a level of connection that you may not have had with that person. So loneliness, connection, and communication.
Why the issue? Why even for you personally, was there not that, okay, I need to reach out, I need to talk, I need to talk about what's going on in my life? Like, why is that the issue at the moment for men in particular?
I think it's probably a couple of things in that they probably haven't tested the waters. So they actually don't know how, there's a fear of like, how will this person respond to what's, my situation? And for a lot of us, Joseph Burgo writes a really good book on shame. A lot of us, there's a level of shame around it, and shame we keep in the back, it's tucked in the fourth drawer, and we never bring it out. So for us to step forward into that place of vulnerability, which you talk, amazingly about, requires us to be open and also, bring to light what has been shame for so many of us. I think one of the other challenges that I've mentioned a couple of times, but we probably don't talk about enough, is if you feel a sense of comparison or competition with a mate, and there's so much of this bullshit that goes on, it's really hard for you to feel comfortable being vulnerable, because there's just a slight disconnection in trust, because you can sense that they're competing or comparing with you. And on a little level, even if it's minute, there's almost a sense of relief in them, or like they're okay with the fact that you're in that struggle because they've got this, bullshit comparison competing. So if there's any, gap between the two of you from an ego point of view, or a comparison competing, then you're not really going to feel like that's the person that you can open up to.
Yeah. How do you think that you can drop? Because I love being competitive. You boys love being competitive. You guys are playing tennis against each other every couple of days. You're in the gym. And I think I know that I've seen things where, that competition is just not healthy across the board, that it's ego driven, all this sort of stuff. For me personally, growing up in a sporting household, I'm highly competitive. I don't necessarily view competition that way. I think it is rooted in ego, wanting to beat or be better than someone, but I don't necessarily believe that it's unhealthy. So how do you, I guess, keep the competitive spirit, which is quite a masculine trait, I believe, like that drive, that life energy, that force? How do you keep that separate to, okay, well, I'm actually not competing against my mates in life. It's just in tennis. It's when we go to the gym. It's when we play a game of footy or something like that. How do you keep that balance, or maintain that balance?
It's your relationship with it, like everything, it's your relationship with the competition. So, if Janoah beats me in tennis, which doesn't happen very regularly, then it's more about how I respond after that. That's the big thing. And I agree with you, in sport, like it brings out the best in us. Yeah. And again, knowing that ego part. So I remember this one situation where, this is a pure example of ego, of like, I would prefer to come on this 5K run. I don't know where this thought came from. And this guy was, who's moving pretty quick. I would prefer to beat him, even if it meant I got a slower time than what I got previously. So It's like, okay, so I've gone backwards in my own fitness, but I beat him. That's ego. That's when you've got an unhealthy relationship with it. So, again, the obvious one is, be better than you were yesterday. If I got a 20-minute, 5K, then my goal is to beat that, and that's where that ego bit, and it's a game, to a certain degree. And I know Janoah talks about ego in a much healthier light than I do. And I think in part because he's probably has and does have a better relationship with the ego. Like the ego was, for me, my biggest downfall. So I still, while I see the value in it, I still talk about it more often in a negative way because of, the way in which it's fucked my life in the past.
How do you view ego then, Jay, on that? Because obviously we have so many conversations around it, and as Blake just highlighted, he still is. I would use the word integrating his ego. We talk about shadow work, we talk about integration. I think Blake is still on that integration of ego, where although you're not perfect, Jay, I think you've probably got a more integrated ego than probably both of us, to be honest. So how do you view the ego, and what would you tell men listening, women listening around integration of that ego?
Well, the way I view ego, and there's lots of so many different takes on ego and how it fits and what. So the way I view it and talk about it is our ego is our sort of human expression of our animal nature, and part of our animal nature is only interested in protecting this human being here so we can survive, and protecting our identity. And what the ego will, and so the identity we've created for ourselves, it might be that we always have to win or be the best with chicks or be right. That's part of who we are in our belief system and identity. And our ego will fight to protect that at all costs, even to our own demise and at the peril of other people and our relationships, to prove that we are right. Because literally what our body also does is we'll experience sort of pleasure sensations when we perform behaviors that are conducive to survival. Now, ego being a main driver and protector of our survival of the identity and our self, it's going to almost reward us. Sometimes we actually can feel kind of good in a weird way when you just for the sake of it, you're like, no, you have the last word. Like, I'm right. I won. I'm better. I'm that. It's not healthy, but it's literally part of how we operate. So it doesn't mean that you are broken or weak. It's inherent in our DNA, how we've evolved. And so integrating it means increasing a level of awareness around those times when you are acting in ways, saying things that you go, hang on a second, do I have to be right? Is there another way? Is losing okay? Is it okay to have my mate beat me, today in tennis, and I'm still a man? Yeah. And that a big key around that for me is around awareness and checking in on, is my response, words, behavior, is it driven by ego and trying to protect this, identity that I have? Or is it driven by a deeper level of being okay with other ways and other belief systems and other views? Because often other people have a conflicting idea, belief, whatever it is. It's not wrong. It's just conflicting to your belief and identity, and we'll fight without consciously thinking, often to, degrade or discredit or whatever it is, that, and push them away. So a big key around that is around awareness of where is this response, behavior coming from in that sense, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I've started to notice my ego emerging in a new light as I'm kind of getting older, as we're becoming more successful, or I'm becoming more successful. Is this need to be respected now? And it's not because for me, it, I need to be respected is as long as I respect myself and how I'm acting, then I'm happy. That's the healthy approach, right? But now I'm starting to go, no, I need to be respected by others. How dare you speak to me like that? Respect me. And it's really interesting. And I spoke about this on the group call that we ran for our mentorship, where I almost got into a fight over this need to be respected. And reflecting upon it, it was wow, that was all ego. And I haven't been in all ego in a long time. I've never been in a fight before, whatever. And there was this perfect storm of I'd had a few drinks. I was around 3 or 4 beautiful women. And then these guys came in who I kind of knew, I kind of didn't know. And they started really disrespecting me in my own house. And I just clicked, and I never click. And I clicked, and I've gotten out of the bed, and I puffed my chest up, gotten in his face. I'm like, fucking respect me in my house, you can get out. And I have never, I could not recall a time ever when I've been so in my ego of I need to be respected now. And it's super interesting because, the three of us talk about, I think pretty well, this idea that, we're not perfect, although we're working in the space and although we're doing the stuff. And, what really is great about doing the work is having the accountability, having your mates there to go, mate, that's not on or whatever. But we can all slip up no matter how far down the track we go. We can all slip up, get stuck in our ego, make mistakes, etc. And for me, that was a massive wake-up call of okay, Dill, you're still doing the work, brother. Let's just calm down a little bit here. Let's take it down a notch. Thankfully, we didn't get into a fight. I was able to have some awareness that, he's got 4 mates all above 6'5". I'm probably going to get rocked in my own house here. Let's de-escalate this situation. I was able to de-escalate it. But that was really interesting, having that reflection back on that ego point that you brought up. And on that, I think we talk a lot in the men's space. I think something that can get pretty tiring for men, people in general as well. And you mentioned it before, Jay, around you're not broken. And I think in the men's space and with the work we do, we tend to focus a lot on the accountability piece, which I love and we all love, is let's level up, let's do better, let's focus on the areas that we're not good at and let's work on them. But I think it can get quite tiring, focusing always on that. And what do you think, now that we've worked with MoMENtum for almost 18 months now, what do men do really well? Maybe it surprised you, but what are the things that men do really well and we actually are, picking some goals in?
So what I've actually, particularly in our mentorship, has probably been the best representation of seeing, what guys are willing to do and what they're willing to do is actually, and it almost stems to a little bit to Blake's comment around that sort of connection pieces. I've got 15 odd guys, most of whom who have never met, and in a container where they feel kind of safe, I suppose, to share. These guys are actually really willing to open up. They're kind of almost waiting to be told it's okay and you're not going to get judged and, smashed for it. And almost a lot of the guys are even one of the guys the other day was sharing something of it, as you guys know, and he sort of cried a bit and all the other boys were like, man, respect. It was almost like, yeah, you're a fucking man because you were willing to sit there and cry and bare your soul. And that was seen as strength. And so given the right circumstance, all the guys are opening up and just sharing their shit. And also on the back end, as you will see, they're all supporting each other. They're messaging each other on the side going, hey man, I've picked up on something, there's obviously a lot more awareness as well. Cause even some of these guys are picking up on things that I hadn't seen. One of the boys was like, yeah, so-and-so messaged me. And cause he saw I was off and I was like, mate, I didn't pick up on that little piece there. And he did. So there's a lot, I think guys, when they drop the mask, there's a lot more awareness and compassion and willingness to share than we realize. There's often a bit of a story around men that we don't want to, they kind of do, given the right environment. So it's actually been really inspiring. I don't know, we've all talked about it, to see what these guys are actually willing to do and really stepping up.
Spot on. I spoke about it on a different podcast yesterday. I say that's probably the greatest misconception that men fall into, is this idea that men don't have the capacity to open up or feel. And it's you get them in the right environment, as you said, the container, we're good at it. We're actually, and I think it's because we internalize so much of it that we're probably having the internal dialogue so often, and which causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. So it ends up becoming a negative thing. But once you get the outlet, it's like, oh man, I feel so bloody good. I've actually had this conversation with myself 8 or 9 times in the last week. Now I'm able to get it out. I feel amazing. B-Dubs, what would you add to that? What would you put on top?
Mate, I was going to go on a similar kind of path. Obviously working with a lot of women, and even now in the coaching space, there's this belief that men, don't know what to say, can't say. But, I posted it a couple of weeks ago and it kind of ruffled a few feathers. But, if you gave me your guy and I put him in the right environment, I bet you he could open up more in 2 hours than he has in 2 years with you. So I think there's a real kind of shift of responsibility, and what's really important, albeit, potentially hard to swallow, is that, you need to take some responsibility. I know from being in numerous relationships and deals, I don't know how you or Jay feel, but I know the difference between a relationship where I feel comfortable, seen, supported, and heard, and how I can kind of rest and open up, and the ones that I don't, and how I would come across as, probably quite dry and not being able to communicate. And I would back myself as a, pretty good communicator these days, but it's very, based upon the environment and how much I kind of feel that I can trust the environment and feel safe, seen, and supported. And I don't think the word safe gets used often when it comes to blokes, but there is a level of safety that, we feel depending on who we're around. Conversations, even Jay and I were out for a few drinks last night. I have such a deep level of feeling now to, like, do I trust this person or do I not? Like, I feel it really instantly. And then I know where to kind of guide conversations from there. So, I think it's a bit of bullshit, and I think we need to take a bit more responsibility as the partner. What type of environment are we creating for this person to feel supported and open up?
Absolutely. It's something that I ask all the time as well. It's like, well, why do you feel like he doesn't feel like he can come to you? Like, what is he lacking from you? And that can be partner, or it can be a mate, or whatever. We obviously get questions from guys like, oh, my mate's struggling, he's not opening up to me. It's like, well, have you provided that safe environment for him to feel comfortable doing so? And I think what you've touched on safety, and then safety and security, and then being seen and understood, for me, that's like my number one thing now in a relationship. Like, that's something that it's non-negotiable now. I need to feel safe, secure. I need to be able to be seen and understood. And if you were to do a random, Q&A with bunch of women, I would be interested to see if that would be the top answer. If you were to go, what does your man need the most? I think a lot of women wouldn't answer with that question. I think a lot of men, once someone say that to them, like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, I really do need that in a relationship. I really crave relationship. I think we talk about it a lot, that balance of the feminine and masculine energy. Even the most masculine men have feminine energy in them. And that feminine energy really does crave what we just discussed, and creating that balance between the two, one being the rock, and then two also, hey, I also need to lean on you too. Can you be the rock a little bit as well? And working with men, or speaking with mates, they feel the need to just 100% be the rock. And it's like, nah, like you can relax into that. You can kind of chill out a little bit and lean on me for support.
And also acknowledging the fact that, it's not always easy to create that space. Like, we're not taught the language to use to each other. We're not taught, like, how do you create, as a partner from both sides, like, for example, as a woman, or a man, to create a safe space for your, male partner who's heavy in the masculine. Even simple things like the languaging that you use and the scene that you set and when you do it is all actually really, really important. Because I know there's lots of people probably maybe listening going, yeah, but I try and I say, come on, let's talk, and they don't respond in the right way. And so there's actually, we're not obviously talking about it today, but there's a lot to delve into in terms of like how to approach and set up a situation and use the right languaging to give the best opportunity for, the partner to feel safe to open up in that space. That's also a big thing to be aware of as well. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about revving it up internally, relatable, educational, vulnerable. Why do men need to be vulnerable? Or what is the importance to leaning into vulnerability? And I open it to both of you to kind of have a crack at answering a pretty difficult question, to be honest. But why is it important to lean into vulnerability, right? We've mentioned awareness. There's so much awareness now. Mental health, mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, open up, talk about it. I've yet to see, those bigger companies that have such a massive platform actually delve into, well, this is why you need to do it, right? It's more just like a do it. So what do you boys think is the importance behind leaning into vulnerability?
So I'll take one little track here, and I'm sure Blake will go down another. One, and this is also coming from personal experience, that we all have like and I think Blake, you touched on the shame component, a side of ourselves that we aren't necessarily proud of, or that we don't quite understand, and that we don't want to necessarily be seen, and that we see as a weakness. And if we aren't able to, look into it, share it, work on it, and we just try to push it away and hide it, that we are unable to sort of master our full holistic self, because we have the good and the bad and the ugly and all these different components and some of the old conditioning and bits and pieces in our makeup, and that's okay. And if we don't allow these things to be seen in some way, they're going to impact us negatively in some kind of a destructive behavior or a reaction to certain things, or over time it'll manifest and build up and turn into a explosion of anger or whatever that could be. So the way I look at it as being vulnerable is actually, giving yourself the best opportunity to master the whole of yourself, the good and the bad. And for me, that's really how I see the vulnerable piece is actually, there's a whole, and that's that we talk about the shadow side, the dark side, the shame, whatever, the guilt around it. That's a part of all of us. We've all got components of our personality, our life that we're not necessarily proud of, that we don't think need to be seen. And when we can be vulnerable about that, it allows others to understand us better, and us to understand ourselves better, and then bring the best version of ourselves forward with all that stuff in awareness, without trying to hide and push it away. So for me, it really comes into feeding our ability to, for lack of a better term, master ourselves in a more holistic sense.
And so what happens when you don't? I'm a man. I've been told my dad didn't cry. My dad didn't show emotion. I've grown up going, now vulnerability means weakness. What happens to those parts of myself that I'm ignoring, or I'm shaming, or I'm putting in the corner?
Well, we're suppressing those parts of ourselves. And when we suppress, which is an active mode, or repress because we've just been trained and the body starts doing that naturally, we actually, these things, they get stored in our body, and they will manifest into other things and how we behave and act in the world. So the way I see that playing out is we push shit away. That's going to keep bubbling up to the point where it'll either just explode into a really destructive or unhealthy thing, or it could develop into some kind of illness, disease, whether that's physical or mental or anxiety or, depression or whatever that might look like. So I see that as putting pressure on our nervous systems to the point where it's going to come out in some way, and us feeling a little disconnect between, there's this sort of part of me I don't really know, but I'm kind of hiding and kind of push, but then here's the front I put on, and we won't feel good about ourselves in an alignment if that's the case.
Well, to go further on that, what Jay said with that, a book called The Body Keeps the Score is really good in that anything we suppress is being stored in our body and will show up either as a physical ailment or, something else down the track. A really good analogy that I liked is if you think about that, shadow work, so to speak, and I'm sure at some stage over the next 12 months, we'll do a podcast on that. The harder you put, if you're thinking about a ball and you're pushing it underwater, the harder you push it down and the deeper you push it down, the more intense it's going to kind of blow back up. And that's essentially what's happening when you're storing that stuff. And if you look at, again, the Body Keeps the Score talks about this really well. Domestic violence, which is fucking disgrace in Australia, is that one of the real concerning signs for a lot of these guys is the way in which they flip the switch so quickly. And it's like, where the fuck did that come from? Because they're so out of awareness with their body, it just happens like in a split second. Whereas they talk about the lack of, or the disassociation with people with domestic violence with their own bodies, because had you felt a sense of like, oh, my heart rate's elevated, or I'm feeling a bit tight in the chest or whatever, you'd see it coming and you'd find a way to de-escalate before you got to the breaking point. So these guys are so out of touch with their body that when they flip the lid and do something that they fucking regret straight away, it's because, in part they couldn't see the warning signs that was building up. And that's because of years and years of suppression that they've just created such a heavy disassociation with their body that they don't see these warning signs. I think when it comes to vulnerability, Jay kind of touched on something that we're big on is, shame. And if you look, without going into kind of energy too much, shame is the lowest vibration of all emotions. So in terms of you and your kind of spark and life and getting the most out of it, you're kind of, while you continue to carry around the shame, you're at a pretty low dense energy. So that's kind of one element. I think the other thing is, for me, I've always been big on doing it publicly, and that obviously isn't comfortable in any way. But I'd also like for us to be in a position where we can normalize the ugly bits, because so many of us are walking around, I think, with the perfection of Instagram and the way that, people are putting others on pedestals and thinking that everything's perfect, is it creates more separation between, the Instagram carry on and those that are carrying around the shame going, fuck, I feel even more shame on top of my shame because these guys look like they've got their life sorted and it's all kind of glossy. So they're walking around with their head even, more in the dumps. So, we're in a really fortunate position where we can normalize this stuff. E.g., oh, you've done that, so have I. You've fucked up, so have I. Like, that's cool. Let's normalize it. Bring it out of the closet, bring everything out. Let's own it. Let's bring it to the light, and then we can kind of move forward with a new found level of lightness and positivity.
Yeah.
The other thing on that is connection. We are here to connect. And when you continue to hide those shadow parts of you, you're not really connecting on the deepest of levels. And, I spoke about this kind of a couple of days ago of like, who does your partner actually love? Do they love the true, authentic version of you? Or do they love the version that you've tried to show up with for the last 10 months? Because if they're loving that second version, you're still going to feel a sense of loneliness because deep down that you're full of shit and you're hiding all the stuff that are true to you. So, so many of us will feel lonely in a relationship and go like, I wonder why, because I kind of feel love. It's because they're loving a version of you that isn't you, and you don't feel seen, heard, and understood. So it's really important. We spoke about someone being able to hold the space for you to feel seen, heard, and understood, but you also need to meet them halfway and go, I need to actually start showing up as the real version of me, because at the moment there's a gap.
Yeah. And no one, or at least, we try to follow influential people that are going to impact us in a positive way rather than the Instagram influencers. There's not a lot of people talking about that being probably the most important reason to showing up as your authentic self is if you aren't, it doesn't matter how much love your partner gives you. You're not going to feel that on some level, as you've just discussed. You're not going to be able to go, yep, this person loves me. They love the idea of you that you've portrayed to them. And there's going to be a massive disconnect where you're just going to be feeling like shit for multiple reasons. One, you're lying. You're lying to your partner. You're showing up day to day and you're lying to them. And you're also not going to be able to feel love. Your self-worth's going to be low. You're going to be like, because I think once you do it enough, you tell yourself, well, if I was to show up as my authentic self, they wouldn't love me. So I can't then drop the masks, right? I can't, because if they do, then I'm not going to get the love that they're giving me. But it's a lose-lose situation, because the love that they are giving you, you ain't feeling anyway. So it's an interesting thing that's just not spoken about enough.
Well, it's a challenge, mate. Like, it's a challenge initially as well. Do you know what I mean? Because as you start to show up more authentically as you, and this is one of our big, pillars with MoMENtum, being authentic and being the real you, its dynamics will change. Like, there is zero fact that dynamics will change, but what will come to light is a deeper sense of connection with those that come into your world. And obviously, you may have parted ways with some people and opened up space for those people to come in. So, as harsh as it sounds, and I know I tend to be a little bit more harsh than you two at times, is we're all fucking lying in some way. And it doesn't necessarily come from a bad place. Often it comes from a place of shame, guilt, fear, embarrassment, whatever it is. But we're all lying, and as we start to create a better relationship with the shame, as it starts to create a better relationship with our true authentic self, then we can have the courage to, step into that. And dynamics and relationships might change, but guaranteed that you'll feel more fulfilled when those new people come into your world who love you for your most authentic self now that you're showing it to the world.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting thing too, backtracking a little bit to what you said before. I think the first step for men is, because we tend to get the questions from women in our networks of, how do I get my man to open up more and communicate with me? That's probably one of the bigger questions that we get. For me, it's take it back a step and get the guy just to have some awareness on what he's feeling. It's very hard for me to communicate with you how I'm feeling if I don't even know what I'm feeling, right? If I'm so disconnected from my body, how am I meant to communicate that to you? I don't even know. Like, I am good because that's what I think I am. Yeah, no, I'm good. Work was good, because I'm just so disconnected from what's actually going. And that's why I love, Jay's body scan that he does so frequently in our mentorship. That's a really great tool. And Jay, do you want to talk on the body scan and what that allows, men or people to do?
So the whole intention of the body scan is to almost reconnect our mind with our body, because we spend, men and women, to be honest, but particularly men, most of our time up in our heads trying to think our way through life, right? And the amount of people that come to me and say, oh, my mind is the craziest, like I overanalyze everything and blah, blah. I'm like, so is everyone, because we're so up in our heads. And especially part of the masculine is to be the problem solver, right? We're logical, we're rational. We're like, everything is a problem to be fixed. We're all up in here all the time. And so often when, we get asked a question, we'll go, well, what do we think about this? And, to be able to truly be integrated, we also need to have a level of awareness around what we're feeling in the body. Because also, we're talking about, storing trauma or suppressing feeling and emotion, that gets stored in the body as chemical memories in the cells of our body. And if we aren't able to be aware of and articulate what we're feeling, we're disconnected with one half of ourselves, which is the physical.
Yeah.
And so by us, the way we process a lot of, feeling, emotion, trauma is by allowing ourselves to feel it and not try to analyze and overthink it. So the body scan allows us to, I guess, reteach ourselves how to get back into our bodies and feel. And it's like, situation is, what do you think about the situation? No, what are you feeling right now? Oh, I think he's an idiot. No, what do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a bit of tightness in my chest because I feel frustrated. That you're already getting a deeper level there than, if you move away from the thinking, it's like, what do you feel? And so by getting used to our breath, the power of our breath, it just transforms how we operate anyway in our brain. But this is just a great way just to, in a minute, get into our body and just integrate and align our brain and bodies again.
Yeah. That simple shift from I think to I feel is so important.
I think the other thing, just quickly, and Deals, you're really good with this stuff, so I'm going to let you speak in a sec as well, is I think we still, and everyone's kind of doing the best we can, but it's really important to decipher what a feeling is. Like, I feel like I want to punch that person. That's not a feeling.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's an action, maybe an emotion. I'm not sure, but I feel anger. I feel sadness. I feel tightness. Like, I feel like I want to run through a brick. I feel like I'm so powerful I could run through a brick wall. That's not a feeling.
Yeah.
So it's really important that as you kind of create this language to be able to articulate, like, what do you feel? And I had the same thing, and it kind of frustrates me now that I've made peace with her about it. Like, my coach used to start the session with, oh, so what are you feeling today? And I, for like 4 years straight, would be like, oh, so I think I'm kind of, and then I'd fucking go off on a ramble. And she didn't correct me for 4 years. And then one day it just clicked. And I was like, oh, fuck, like the wisdom of coaches, they'll let you kind of work out your own path. Fuck, it's exhausting sometimes. But like 4 years later, she's like, oh, you get it now. And then it changed everything. So, but it's
misery earlier.
Yeah, mate, take me out of my misery. I'm stuck here. But it'd be good, and Deals, you're brilliant with this stuff, but really being able to articulate what you feel, and obviously the best language that you can, but know the difference between a feeling or an emotion and action as well, which are very different.
Well, the resistance, even just in communicating for men what they feel, like, you'll notice they'll start, I think the blah, 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 blah. No, what do you feel? I think blah, blah, blah. No, what do you feel? I think I feel. It's like, no. What do you feel? It's like there's such a resistance. And the masculine does operate above the shoulders. It's very logical, wants to solve problems, driven, etc. So you ask them what they feel. It's like, no, get out of the head into your body. And that's why I love the body scan, because you literally do the scan, you can pick up on what you're feeling in your body, and then you can go from there. And for anyone that's wanting to communicate better or wanting other people to communicate better, start with that. I feel, right? And even just look at your body. I feel, as Jay said, I feel tightness in my chest. I feel a lump in my throat, whatever. Then you can go, well, what emotions associated with that feeling? Okay, I feel tightness in my chest because I've got a work meeting coming up that I'm not prepared for, and I'm nervous about, right? Or I'm stressed for that. Okay, that's, you're getting now into your feelings and into your body. Blake, you mentioned before around bringing light to the parts that we're ashamed of or we feel shame around. What would you like to bring light to, brother?
It depends how long you've got, but
all the time in the world for you, mate.
Well, for me, I think it's really important for us to lead by example. Like it's our job. So I've been very proactive in talking about my different struggles through social media, and a big part of where this all stemmed from was a 15-month just deterioration of everything, to the point where I lost everything. And, Janoah and I had a laugh just before I really bottomed out, where I was like, oh, mate, at least I've still got my physical and mental health, and God bless his soul. He probably could have questioned my mental health at that time, but he didn't. And then I ended up in hospital the next week with what they thought was meningococcal. So my physical health was taken away from me. But, in terms of ownership and moving the shame, like 3 years ago, I filed for bankruptcy. And as a male, that is what so many of us kind of hang our hat on, and at the time I was in a relationship, and that was really hard. And for probably 12 months, I didn't talk about it. Only my girlfriend knew, which is also a fuck ton of pressure on her to hold that as the only person who really knew about it.
Yeah.
And to be fair to her and credit to her, she was the catalyst for me starting to diversify where I, connect with people through my struggles. Because at one point it was just her and it was my coach, and that's a lot. That's not fair on her in any way. And, I carried around a lot of shame. And even as I talk about it now, I can feel still a sense of, tightness that comes with it. So for me, that would be the most shameful thing. And it's really hard, as I said, from a masculine point of view, that's what we hang our hat on, most of us, our career, being the provider, the breadwinner. So that was the hardest thing. And, if I look back at it now, I've spoken to you boys about this so many times. All well and good for me to acknowledge that I was bankrupt, but what's more important is to acknowledge how I got there. Otherwise, I fall into the trap of potentially repeating myself. So, at the core of it, I was a fucking liar, like in so many ways. And ego, lack of awareness, poor skill set naturally in terms of how to manage a business. But all of that aside, I was a liar, and deep down, we know. Like we know the truth, but we play from the shoulders up and we try to pretend everything's okay. And we don't really listen to that inner wisdom or that inner voice that's going, stop fucking lying, mate. You're lying. Yeah. You're lying. You're telling a story. And you just find a way to just keep bullshitting and justifying it and making up stories. And for me, that was the case. And eventually life's going to slap you on the nuts if you don't listen. So, do you want to listen to those whispers and start to make some change, or are you going to keep telling yourself a bullshit story and eventually get caught out? And I know I've posted it a couple of times in the last few weeks. I love the little scene from 8 Mile with Eminem where he's doing his little rap battle and he literally just outs himself. He's like, yes, I'm trailer trash. Yes, my mum, I live, in the caravan with her. And then he throws the mic over to mate and goes to the mic to the guy and goes,
tell him something they don't already know about.
Yeah. And the bloke's got, well, fuck, I've got nothing. So, whether there's other people carrying dark secrets around about you, or at the very least, you're carrying a whole bunch of dark secrets and showing up to the world as a liar, you've just got to, bring it to the front. And there's liberation and freedom on the other side of it.
And Jay, I'm going to ask you the same question as well, being what was your lowest point, or where would you like to shine some some light. But before I do go to you, Blakey, obviously Janoah, yourself and me have spoken about your 15 months ago being really bad, but I'd love for you to get a little bit more specific and actually share, that journey for you to help other people, but also, as you said, to lead by example and be vulnerable. I think you can be more vulnerable right now in terms of more actual details of what happened. I get the lack of awareness and the ego and all that sort of stuff, but there's some great lessons that I think a lot of people will get some value out of if you could just be a bit more specific around what it is that you did go through and some of those learnings that you learnt.
Yeah, well, it's, for me, I studied NLP about 12 months before this. But up until that point, Janoah and I had a bit of a laugh. Like, I used to think I was perfect 4 years ago. Like, who the fuck on earth thinks they've got it all sorted? But that was me. So, from when I studied NLP, I started to make sense of like, fuck, I've got a lot of limiting beliefs. And I came from a family who, money was almost frowned upon. There was a lot of envy and jealousy of them. And I created a whole bunch of stories around money. Over the last 3 years, I've had to, from a coach that I had back in the day, I've had to write down all my limiting beliefs, all my limiting behaviors. And I kind of knew it was coming, but I had to get the proper hit. And it was when the guy, I can't remember the name of them, Ombudsman, whatever they're called.
The
guys.
Ombudsman.
Yeah. It was when he rocked up to, he's literally, I don't know their exact title, but essentially he rocked up to the front door with my letter. I don't even know how he found my address. I was still trying to hide at that stage. But he rocked up to the front door with a letter, and I opened it, and Tees was in the back, and it just, like, in fucking big bold writing said declaration of bankruptcy. And like, that was a moment where my stomach just dropped.
Oh.
And I tried to fight it for a long time. I was like, oh yeah, I can find my way out of $250,000 worth of debt. Like, just fucking completely deluded by it all. And just like, oh, it'll take me 5 years. And then my accountant just, ripped the Band-Aid and said, Blake, you're not going to make it out of this. Like, you're just going to have to wave the white flag and declare bankruptcy. And I fought it and I fought it and I fought it. And then when I finally let go, there was a sense of relief. I was like, you're right. I can't get out of this. I don't know where to go. I feel like I'm fucking in quicksand and I can't get out. And I'm just living a lie. And for me, that felt like the bottom, as I said, and as it would for a lot of blokes. And I was in a position where I could, still work the next day. I literally just had to change from a company to a sole trader, and I could open the doors the next day. So from that point of view, nothing really changed. But there was a deep level of shame that I carried around for a long time. And then it was just the catalyst. It was the catalyst for the doors just blowing open. Teagues and I left Sydney, went to Melbourne. I tried a few jobs down there. I got fired 3 times in 8 months. And again, similar thing. People around me, God bless their cotton socks, were like, oh, they've made a terrible decision by firing you. Oh, can't believe you got fired again. Still in this fucking, and me, like, real flat, bought into their stories. But deep down, I knew, but bought into their stories of like, yeah, they've made a really bad decision.
I remember
yeah.
And you being like, mate, I got let go. I don't know what. I was like, oh, mate, what happened? You was like, oh, they just fucked up. And because we were still, this is pre-MoMENtum, right? So we went, so I was just like, oh, mate, that sucks. What dogs?
It's their fault.
I remember thinking at the time, and obviously I didn't say it to you, but I remember thinking, but how do you get fired from 2 places? So I was like, 1, okay. But I was like, 2? I was like, okay. Like, what's going on with B-dubs?
And then the third one came, and it was just a catalyst. My car broke down. I was in a fight with Jeep for 6 months. Obviously, the breakup with the girlfriend. And in that moment, she was driving back with her mum to Sydney. I had no money, no car. I was in a house, the person who I was living with in Brighton. I was in the house for a week, and then she's like, you're going to have to go after that. So I was like, no money, no girlfriend, no car, no house, no job, no direction. And I can't even drive to see a mate because I don't have a fucking car. So I'm sitting in this empty house in Brighton, just going like, what am I doing? Like, where's my life going? And even to walk to Centrelink to see if I could get on the dole was like a 50-minute walk up Brighton, up the highway. And I remember in that moment just going, I get why blokes jump. Do you know what I mean? Like I had that split, that real dark moment for a second. And, you know, one thing I will say is when I was real flat is there was a lot of pressure externally coming from me. But what I know now, moving out of that victimhood, is it was only because they cared. You know, the pressure that came in the relationship, the pressure that came in the friendships, more so the relationship. And for me as a male, like I want to be the provider. So I'm feeling a deep level of shame that I can't hold my own and provide for the person that I love the most. And then they're kind of, you know, egging me on to just do something. You know, and it's all coming from a place of love and probably realistically from a place of like fear, because like, you know, I am the masculine. I do need to hold somewhat of an anchor for this relationship, and I can't even put my socks on in the morning, you know? So at the time I was like, oh, they're putting so much pressure on me. But now I see it purely from, you know, it's because they cared, they loved me, and they really wanted to make it work. So that was that. Went to Newcastle, got fired from there, you know, went to Sydney quickly, got my car broken into, did ayahuasca, went to hospital with what they thought was meningococcal, did ayahuasca, and then that was kind of a week after that it opened up. And, you know, each of those on their own, you know, may seem bad, may not, you know, each to their own in terms of how they feel about it. But the collective of that over 15 months, I was like, I fucking surrender. And for me, that was the most disempowering thing. But there's actually a lot to be said to surrender into the universe and seeing kind of what comes. And in that moment, I surrendered for, you know, a week pretty much. I was like, fuck, I can't, like, there's no point in me fighting this. It felt really disempowering. But it was a week later that, you know, the idea around MoMENtum came, and I called Jay, and that was, you know, the start of the climb back up. And, you know, what I will say to anyone in a real dark place is, you know, September 2019, I was rock bottom. And then September 2020, Janoah and I are up in Byron Bay having the fucking absolute time of our life, you know, just absolutely loving life. So it can turn around really quickly. And I know for me in that moment, there was no light at the end of the tunnel, you know, especially as a masculine, not having a purpose or a direction. Every time I entertained the idea of the future, I felt sick with anxiety. So I had to come back to, okay, how do I just get through today, one day at a time, put my shoes on, get up, get the day done, and try to move forward. So that's the story.
Absolutely.
Long-winded one.
Mate, love it. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure whoever does listen to it will get a lot out of that. And, you know, we are grateful that, and again, kind of bringing it back to what we talked about at the start around, you don't have to lose touch with being mates to also hold space. Like, you know, we hold space for you and we talk that out and we're there for you. But then when we go to the bank to set up a MoMENtum account,
forgot about this.
Yeah, an absolute shit on you. Like, we are being savages, right? But I think it's that balance of like, we were there for you when you needed it, we're there whenever you need to talk about it. But also, when there's an opportunity to hang shit on you when we go to the bank and you're not able to be a owner or a business owner because you're still bankrupt and you've got that time period, right? Me and Jay, we're getting stuck in and we're taking the piss and we're pissing ourselves laughing. And, you know, when I can't remember what happened, we were all sitting there in the bank and you looked around the corner and you go, hang on, does it tell you that I'm bankrupt? And we've just lost it. We've just absolutely lost it. And, you know, you were laughing too. And obviously we were able to have that, rebuilt the relationship up to get to that point. But it's also important for the guys listening, you know, you don't have to lose that Aussie banter, that hang shit of mate. But when it's balanced out with the, hey mate, I've got you, it's a safe place for you to talk to me. It's awesome because the banter does make you closer to it. Does go, okay, the boys love me, they're giving me shit, okay, fucking all right, ha ha ha, kind of thing. Jay, what was your lowest point, or what is some areas in your life that you felt a tremendous amount of shame that maybe you're still working through it, or that you have worked through and you were able to talk it out?
It's probably for me was when I was in my phase of I really had this narrow fucking minded view of the world, and I was very pig-headed and arrogant, and I was partying a lot. Like I drank. I was pretty fucking extreme. Some people might have explained me as a bit of a fucking nut, because I was just like, I could drink, and I would make a point to drink anywhere under the table. Same with doing drugs. I could pump it for days, like if I wanted to. Like, and I would, with girls, I didn't treat them that well, and to my friends even, like I didn't treat them that well. I was just in this like world of just me, and I was operating pretty destructively, quite ego driven. And I still remember, one of my good mates, he sort of pulled me up, my best mate. He pulled me up. He just said, man, like, bro, like, the way you're carrying yourself, like you're starting to hurt people close to you. And it wasn't till I remember him, and this is like over 10 years ago that he sort of mentioned it. And I still remember it, because knowing how I was also pretty fiery. And if people question my way, you'd know about it. And so for him to have the love plus balls to say, hey man, like, I love you, but just think about the way you're doing things here, was a huge shift for me. And now looking back on that, I'm sort of glad I went through that. There's also a level of shame that's how I carried myself for so long. Like it was all about that. I was literally, girls, booze, and I was just, doing all my things and whatever, and fucking rah. And there's obviously wasn't a great level of awareness of how I was impacting others. And so that's probably one of the biggest areas that I look back and go, wow, do I regret it? No, because it's helped, the process me. But then what that, funnily enough, continued on to was, because I naturally had a bit of fucking, grit and savage and whatever to me, is then sort of when that started, I sort of became more aware of that. And then I started moving into the space of like, I started meditating and became a teacher. And then I was like, oh, maybe I need to be this sensitive guy. And then I kind of almost lost all that, grit and drive and that sort of that. We talk about it, we've discussed it with you boys, around that sort of embracing more of that shadow side of me, because I became so, I felt so much shame around that whole piece. I kind of got rid of all of it, and some components of that. Yeah. And some of those components of that are naturally who I am. Yeah. Which isn't destructive. There's some parts which are fine. But I put that all in this one little box, and I kind of lost a bit of my edge in a sense, and went down the opposite side and sort of lost some of that side of me. And so it's been a process for me. And obviously we talk about it now, where now I'm like balancing out and coming back to a bit of that natural sort of, I'll use the word savage, that I had in me, and looking at as parts of it are actually healthy as if it's integrated. And I've really enjoyed, that's why I've actually really loved, chatting with you boys, because you guys would call that out. You're like, bro, like that part of you there, that's all right. Like embrace it in a integrated way, and it's okay. So for me, I think what's happened is, because I perceived so much shame around this period of my life, that I carried myself in a certain way and treated people in a certain way, that anything I associate with that, I've kind of, for a while there, I've sort of pushed away. So now it's really around embodying, the masculine, the femme traits, and some of that natural sort of natural parts of me that I'll be trying to push back. And I think I'm getting pretty close now to starting to embody more of that, which is really, really, it's kind of cool as well. You're just like, because you feel like we were saying before, that I know you're both saying it, like when you feel then love and respect from others, when you're showing your true self, that's true. You're like, yeah, it hits, not like they love me because of the front I'm putting on. So that's a really interesting process that have been, and I'm still sort of going through now.
Absolutely. And so because I think and I try to think back on my transition too, from, I say unconscious to conscious, right? What, you're partying, you're boozing, you're not treating your friends right, and you're focused on women. You mentioned that your friend came along and kind of woke you up. but can you delve a little bit more into that transition or that awakening or whatever it is that you called that caused you to go from the unconscious to the conscious, right? Because I feel like so many men have smaller moments like that or moments like that, and they choose to they choose to go, nah, fuck you, you're wrong, I'm fine, and they keep going down that path. Is there any light you can shed around that experience for you?
What really got me out of that was that it was impacting people I loved,
Mm.
people that I said I loved and cared about.
Yeah.
Did I really? If I was willing to treat them in that way, and it was kind of like a smack in the face. It's like, mate, if you really say you love these people and you care about these people, either you take this on board,
yeah,
or you don't. And for me, it was sort of became about more than just me. It was bigger than me. It was like, well, if I truly, and it was a bit of, it kind of ties into, I suppose, that concept of lying and being true to your word. It's like if you say you care about someone and you love someone, but you are willing to continuously treat them in a certain way, that's not in alignment. It struck me because of the idea I'd painted of myself, what I told myself was very different to what he just told me. I had this idea of how I was, and I was like, that doesn't align up with what I think I am. And I was like, oh, fuck. And then obviously chatting with a few other people, that was reinforced. And so that was a real disconnect for me. And it was like, fuck, all right, there's a misalignment here and it's impacting more than just me. And then again, that was quite a slow process though. It was still years later before I really started doing any work. But I had that moment of where that was, I think, the catalyst for me shifting a little bit and shifting lanes a little bit.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great.
What about you, Dilsey? Because I know you've obviously had different levels of shame and you've shared your stories at different times, and there's a few different stories that have really, been the catalyst for your kind of pivotal moments. What are those for you?
Yeah, I think my biggest catalyst moment would have to be, and I'll kind of keep it a little bit vague to protect the other person, but a while ago now, I went through a horrible breakup that just really, really shook me. And it kind of woke me up, similar to what we've all spoken about, of this idea of who I was at the time was like this fucking amazing guy that was just awesome and such a good boyfriend and could do no wrong. And it was so like in that ego of I'm perfect and I can do no wrong, to going through a breakup that really shook me. And from that, gaining awareness 6 months down the track to, oh fuck, I'm not doing so well. So what happened was I was dating someone. I was like, yep, we're in love. This is the person for me. We actually ended up going through a pregnancy too. And so being a young guy, I had no idea how to navigate that at all. I wasn't able to rely on anyone else within my circle. We kind of agreed that let's just keep this to ourselves, and we can just figure it out ourselves, and we'll figure it out. So I had no support network. She had no support network. I ended up traveling as she was undergoing. Obviously, I don't have a child, so undergoing the abortion. And so I wasn't able to support her. I wasn't able to be there for her. I came back from traveling. The relationship crumbled as a result of me, not being there. And I felt the resentment, etc. And, it was incredibly difficult for me, actually, once I reflected on it. It wasn't necessarily the breakup. It was how I acted within the breakup. It was, how could I have thought that I was this amazing person and quite literally couldn't have been worse of a person if I'd tried. And, I remember one phone call after we'd broken up, I was yelling at her, I was screaming at her, I was calling her all these horrible names, and I hung up. And, it just really it kept me in that really bad place for a lot longer period of time than I needed to. Jay talks about, suffering is a part of life, but there's so much unnecessary suffering that we put ourselves through. And that was the case for me. Was I just suffered for way longer than I needed to. I didn't address the breakup. I went through the breakup, and immediately that night I'm on my phone messaging girls I'm single again. Fuck yeah, right? Like I'm no longer, I don't have the ball and chain anymore, right? We have all this negative language around partnerships. And so I didn't address the shadow side. I didn't address what I was going through. I think I cried for about an hour, called dad, cried, and then that was kind of it. All right, I'm good to go. Um, and that year for me was very much, I was living with my best mate at the time, having an awesome time on the surface level where it's just me and him. My family was in Melbourne. I had so much freedom. I was drinking heaps. I was with my mates, but all my good practice fell away. I stopped working out. I stopped eating well. And 6 months down the track, I couldn't get out of bed for an entire week. And I was just stuck there. And I eventually was like, fuck, this isn't just a hangover. This isn't just what I'd been blaming it on, which was, well, I'm just hungover. That's why I don't feel well. I was like, no, you haven't gotten out of bed for a week. That's not right. So I went and saw a psychologist. And then that's when, he told me, he's like, Dylan, you've got depression and anxiety. And it was twofold for me coming out of that psychologist's office. Was one, sense of relief, because I was like, I've got awareness of a problem that I didn't know was a problem, and now I can work on fixing that. I never, even immediately afterwards, I was like, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to sit in a depressed state or an anxious state longer than I ever need to. And I'm going to try my best to work on myself. As I said, I wasn't eating well. I wasn't working out. I was drinking a lot. My friendship group at the time were great, but it was a little bit of a surface level friendship. We weren't having deep conversations. So all the things that are really good for our mental health that we now know, right, I was not doing. So I never looked at it as like I am depressed, I am anxious. It was like, I've got depression, I've got anxiety, and I can manage it. It was a bit of a disconnect for me immediately. And I've tried to maintain that obviously the whole way through. And then the second part, shame, so much shame just piled on top of me, because it was, I'm Dylan Roos. I come from the Roos family. I've had a great upbringing. I've got a great education behind me. I've got two loving parents. I've got a good support network. I've traveled extensively. I've had a great life. What the fuck do I have to be depressed and anxious about? And so much shame piled on me for that. And that was the biggest thing to work through, was that. And then also the self-forgiveness piece wasn't necessarily the breakup that rocked me. It was how I acted throughout the breakup and post the breakup, and having to reconcile that, no, that was me. Yes, I have to forgive myself for that. And I have to work on, there's the forgiveness piece, but there's also you have to change. You can't do the same things, because it's all well and good to give yourself a pat on the back, but if you stay there, what are you patting yourself on the back for? You're still in the same place. So that was by far the biggest transitory stage for me, was going through that breakup, working through it. And it took me years and years and years. And I'm probably still getting lessons from that breakup as well, that I'm integrating into my life and trying to learn more. But by all accounts, that was the toughest period in time for me, going through the breakup, being alone. So I ended up moving. Once I found out depression and anxiety, I actually failed all of my subjects at uni that year, that term, because I stopped going. I was just in bed basically, and then at night I'd be drinking. So came down to Melbourne, had a really difficult conversation with my parents, and then started to work on myself, and fast track X amount of years. Here we are working in MoMENtum. So it really was the catalyst for me doing the work on myself, and then saying, wow, I've done all this work on myself. How can I, help other people, and how can we as a collective, as MoMENtum, give the greatest impact?
I think two things, Jules, quickly before you go on, that are really worth touching on with your story, which I think a few people will resonate with, is firstly, your struggles are always relative to you. And what I mean by that is, it's not a competition as to whose struggle, whatever. I know someone at one of our talks, when I was talking about my struggles, started comparing my story to theirs. And, I think they'd lost someone, which is horrible. And, I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. And it's not a competition. Like, that was the hardest thing for me. And I had a dark time, and, I had that kind of real scary thought, which for me was, the bottom. So, you know, I think if we look at it in the big scheme of things, you know, all of us here in Australia, metaphorically, I shouldn't say all of us, the majority of us metaphorically are kissed on the dick. You know, like we're living in a fucking brilliant country. I know you're not here at the moment, but we're living in a brilliant country, and most of us got roofs over our head, whatever it may be. There's almost a level of shame that piles on top of the shame that's already there, going, what the fuck have I got to worry about? Like, there's people starving, and that then becomes a catalyst for it staying, you know, in the closet and not wanting us to, you know, not wanting to bring it forward or to talk about it. You know, I know a lot of the boys in the AFL circle, same thing. I'm on 600,000, you know, get to play in front of 50,000 each week. What have I got to complain about? So they never bring it to the forefront. So it's really important for whoever's listening to know that, you know, if they're experiencing that, super common, and it's relative to your experience, and you still need to kind of talk about it and come forward. The second thing is the forgiveness piece, you know, and I'm big on, like, if you knew better, you would have done better, you know, talking about your situation of how you probably didn't handle that, you know, horrible situation very well with, you know, what your partner went through. You know, I've now worked with, I'd say, half a dozen blokes and probably half a dozen women who have been in a similar position. The girlfriends have been pissed at the dudes. The dudes have come to me and gone, fuck, dude, I don't know how to handle something like that. Like, where's the manual of how to handle an abortion? Like, firstly, I'm not experiencing it myself. I've never experienced it. And I've got no idea what the fuck to say, do, whatever it may be. You know, I'm sure Jay can attest to this as well. I look at back of all of my relationships and wish I did better. Do you know what I mean? Like, all beautiful girls, wish I would have treated them better. And had I known better at the time, I probably would have done better. So it's really important for all of us to find a level of compassion to self, knowing that we, you know, did the best we could with the tools that we had at the time. Yeah. And that forgiveness piece. Otherwise, we stay in that kind of heavy, dense energy and we don't move forward. It's not necessarily saying it's okay. It's just saying that it's the best I could have done at that time as well. So I think a lot of people relate to your story, Dills, and probably have got those two similar kind of themes of, like, you know, fuck, I should have done better. And, you know, what have I got to complain about as well? But if you can find peace in that, then that kind of helps you move through it as well.
Good points, Blake.
Well said, B-Dubs. Thank you. Yeah, it's spot on. I put out a poll just before we jumped on, boys. So we do have a couple questions that people wanted us to address. So I'll put it to both of you. And there's only two questions. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe we can, all three of us, go a little bit deeper into this. What do men want, or what does the masculine crave? What do men want, and what does the masculine crave? And I think that is from a place of life, and then we'll do relationships too. Maybe we'll do what does the masculine crave in life, and then what does the masculine crave in relationships. B-Dubs, do you want to kick us off, brother? And then I'll go to Jay, and then maybe I'll kind of round off at the end.
I'll go relationships. I'll let Jay kind of go life.
Yeah, perfect.
Because it's one of our pillars in there anyway. I think firstly, a bloke wants to be seen, you know, and for me, the person who does the men's space the best from a female perspective when it comes to relationships is Alison Armstrong. And anyone who I give the book to, Queen's Code, are like, fuck, that's mind blowing. But essentially, it's empowering a man as opposed to emasculating or castrating him. You know, there's a really good term called the frog farmer, which is essentially, you know, this prince comes to you, and as a frog farmer, you turn him into a frog through emasculating, castrating him, and essentially kind of breaking him down. So to empower him actually works for both people. You empower him and you'll get a lot more out of your relationship, and he'll come forward to you, you know, because he wants to step into that masculine and feel empowered. So what that might look like is, instead of being, you know, quote unquote, the ball and chain, which, you know, has been a running joke for God knows how many decades, is if you know, the ball and chain, so to speak, might say, oh, Barry, you know, fuck, when will you take the bin out? You know, and he's like, oh, fuck, I've just come home from a 10-hour day. Like, here we go again. As opposed to going, hey, Barry, big boy, I love it when you take the bin out. Fuck, he'll take the bin out 10 times a day. So it's really in how you word it and empower him to step into his masculine. Yeah. You will win, guaranteed. If you know through the language that you use and the way that his mind is structured, if you can find a way to empower him, you will win, he will win, and you guys will be much better as a collective. So that's one thing in terms of how to address the masculine. Jay?
So on the life in general, one of the fundamentals of, drivers for us as men and masculinity is around having a level of like purpose, meaning, and mission. Obviously, that's why we make it one of our main fundamental pillars. And what that means is actually having something we're working towards and having an ability to leave some kind of an impact on the world or whatever space that's in. So it's really, really, if whether this question is from a female or a male, or to say, if I'm sitting here and I'm sort of, as a guy, I'm not really sure where I'm going, what I'm working, I'm just kind of just getting through and doing life because I'm going to feel really, really unmotivated, not in alignment, not driven. And I don't want to use the word flaccid, but, that's where the guys can feel a bit like, yeah, fuck it, flaccid. You've got no fucking what?
Flaccid.
Yeah. You got no fucking drive, right? What are you doing? And so it's really, really important that we as men have some kind of a mission. And this doesn't have to be huge. Like we talk about, mission doesn't have to be that you're going to go start an orphanage or change the world. Like it can be something, as small as my mission is, to go into work today and, make 5 people smile.
Yeah.
Or see that person who's really, really quiet and give them 10 minutes of my day, or, whatever. It can be smaller stuff. And you can walk away and go, I completed my mission, or I, added a level of meaning to my life and a level of impact. And, when you see someone else, in terms of supporting, someone who's masculine, heavy in their energy, some support around what they want to be doing and what's important to them and their values, and helping them maybe find something they can work towards, and supporting that is also really, really important, knowing that maybe for them they view their mission as going to work to provide and do their thing for the family. Maybe that's their mission, and supporting that point of view, whatever that can look like. So it's really, really important for us as guys, as human beings with masculine heavy tendencies, to have a level of like drive around, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is why.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think on that, Deals, just quickly before you jump in and give your thing, and we'll always be pretty transparent. So there might be times we push the edges a little bit with what we have to say, and that's okay. But the reality is, and Jay used the word flaccid, and we're fine with that, is like you're either flaccid or you've got fire in the belly. You're one or the other. And if you're flaccid, then it's probably a sign that you're not living in alignment with like some kind of deep passion, purpose, or mission. And David Data talks about this a lot. Like if your partner isn't fucking the world properly with their passion or purpose, don't expect to get fucked properly by them. Like that's the reality, because he's got fire, he's got passion, he's got a lot in him. So, if you're looking at why, even from a chemistry point of view, you're not really getting the true masculine that you're after, well, it's probably, inherently point one of that person's not living a life that's aligned with a deeper passion, purpose, mission, or meaning. And when he or the masculine has got that, expect, some heavier fireworks under the sheets as well.
And on that too, I completely agree, and I think you boys have summed up both areas perfectly, is speaking with some of my female friends in the last couple of weeks. There is a little bit of and I don't want to catastrophize it too much, but there is a little bit of a masculinity crisis in the fire in the belly. So many of the women that I'm talking to are like, he doesn't take charge. He doesn't lead me. He doesn't like tell me what we're doing and when, and, take me out for dinner. It's very much like they use the term, right? Where's his fucking balls? Where are his balls? Like, I'm looking for a masculine man to date me and to lead me and to look after me and make me feel safe and secure, because that is what allows feminine people or feminine women to relax and surrender into their feminine, is when the masculine is strong. It's that tree, it's that take charge and this is a safe place and I've got you, and you can be feminine and you can flow and be in flow with that. And the only other thing that I'd sum up for Janoah is the masculine loves to be in service. It actually really craves on the mission point, but also just in the greater point. It loves to be of service. And when you look at archetypes, you look at the king archetype, or a healthy king archetype, I should say, is to be of service. That is what someone who is in their healthy king is doing. They are of service to others. And that can look like being in a really strong sense of mission or purpose. And the last question, boys, for us before we jump off is, what is the greater vision for MoMENtum? What is the greater vision for MoMENtum?
Well, this is something that's pretty exciting for us and something that's ever evolving. So I probably wouldn't talk too far ahead because it's ever evolving. Like if we look at where we were 6 months ago and where we're at now, it's completely different. But, for us, it was, a good 12 to 15 months of research, really getting clear on what people want, what we're about. And at this stage, it's really the transformation of men, particularly between their 30s and between 30 and 40, that kind of group. And, we said that we want to make the men's space accessible, appealing and attractive. And that's, a big part of what we're doing. And essentially our biggest mission is to create generational change amongst men, because at the end of the day, the next group of men that come through, our kids, when we all find loving relationships and have them, are a byproduct of us, and we need to kind of break the patterns that have been, that have come from generations before. We need to break the patterns now. So in terms of creating generational change, it starts with us. And then there's the flow and effect of, the kids that we have and the kids that they have. So that's my 2 cents.
That's great. Mate, really simplistically, like what I thought we're working towards is having, a greater amount of men who have this balance of, that resilience and that backbone and grit tied in with that a level of emotional intelligence and awareness and empathy with the skills and tools in their belt to help them navigate the world and allow the best, their truest version of themselves to come forward and to help themselves get out of ruts easier. So I think that's literally what it is. It's like allowing men to have a greater awareness of, who they can be in this world, and then have the tools and skill sets to help them navigate it. And literally, I keep using the word perform, and that can sound quite, sports driven. But when I use the word perform, it could be, in your relationship, it could be out with your friends, it could be at work, it could be, anything, and to be able to perform better. So that's really, really simply what I see as a future, what we can work with MoMENtum.
Spot on. You both have absolutely nailed it on the head. So I'll take the more business practical approach in my answer. We're running mentorships. We're running 12-week mentorships. So keep a look out for that. We'll be running retreats too. We've got one coming up potentially in June in Byron. And, we really want this podcast as well to kind of get off the ground. We want to be able to interview some really amazing people. We want to really educate from a really practical standpoint, some of the philosophies that the three of us try to embody, and educate people on how else to embody that, or the things that we've learned and how we can really help. And that's essentially what we're looking to do, in 2021 is those mentorships. We've got a private Facebook community as well that you guys can all check out. I'll put a link in the description of this podcast to that. For, again, men's community, we do weekly catch-ups, weekly check-ins, where it's an opportunity for you guys to get to know us a little bit better, build some trust and trust with the brand MoMENtum and Blake, Janoah, and myself. So that's more from the practical side of things, in terms of what MoMENtum actually does and provides. So get around us on Instagram, get around us on the Facebook group, get around us in the mentorship. We're launching again soon, which you guys will hear a lot more about from us. Boys, it is a pleasure as always. Blake Royal Thompson, Janoah Van Keckham, thank you very much for your time today. I'm sure you guys have 1,000 things to do. Thank you very much.
Mate, it's great to be here. Well done.
Mate, well done, Dills. And I'm excited about seeing where you take the podcast this year. And to everyone who's kind of been on the train at some stage over the last 15 months or still on the train, we're super grateful for, supporting us and the impact that you've had on us, and hoping that we've had an impact on you, and excited to kind of bring you a lot more in 2021 as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, boys.